So, welcome to this event at Spark. Spark is the British Council's festival of online creativity, celebrating connections and inclusion in our communities and offering a platform for cultural exchange between Hong Kong and the UK. And that's across the arts, education, and the English language. So from this Wednesday up until today, we've had over 30 completely free online events from over 40 different creative partners, both from Hong Kong and the UK. So if you want to learn more or find out more, please just visit britishcouncil.hk/spark. So this event is the Public Art Experiment Workshop in partnership with Jacek Ludwig-Scarso of London Metropolitan University. And this workshop is scheduled to run for around 90 minutes, give or take. So my name is Timothy Wong, and I'm the Head of Arts and Creative Industries at the British Council in Hong Kong. For those of you who perhaps cannot see me so well, I'm a man in my 30s with black hair, green spectacles, and I'm wearing a black polo shirt today. So we are recording this event. So I would just ask you please not to record on your own devices or to share. And we have also sent you a link to the British Council's Code of Conduct when you registered for this event. The foundation of that really is just please be respectful of everyone else in the room and their views. Please do keep yourself on mute unless you have a question or you're talking. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom if you have a question or wish to talk. And also, I've got my video on at the moment, and I can see most people have their videos off, but at some points throughout the session, Jacek will be asking you to turn on your video and join and participate in the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jacek now to get us started. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim, and I just wanted to also say what a pleasure it is to be involved again in Spark. 2 years ago, I was very, very lucky to also be involved in Spark 2019. And in that case, of course, way before COVID became a household name, I was able to travel to Hong Kong and visit this beautiful city, and so I can't wait, and I'm really hoping that in the future we can of course go back to doing the festival in person. But having said that, I was just saying to Tim that for me this has been a really interesting and I think probably we can all share similar experiences where through COVID, through this way of talking via screens that obviously was there before COVID, but of course has become much more prominent since. We've all, I'm sure, discovered different opportunities, and I think that's also a possible thing. So this workshop that we're going to do today was born out this particular need. So how to create a workshop that talks about public art and public art where you see. I'm going to give you a couple of slides at the very beginning just to give you a bit more context to what we mean in this context by public art. And most importantly, it's a creative workshop, and the reason and what makes it public is basically the fact that we're using our screens. And so, for the purpose of this, if I can just ask everybody to switch on your cameras, please, so we can all see each other, because you see that later on this point becomes very, very important in this workshop. So, if that's all right with everybody, if we can switch on the cameras. Hi. Is everybody okay? Do you know, so just to remind everybody, you simply go to the bottom left of your screen, and there's the camera button through which you can be seen. Is everybody there? Yeah? Can I Is everybody okay with switching on their cameras? That's all right. No worries. No worries. The only thing, just Connie just mentioned this. That's all right. The only thing is that you will be drawing each other. So I will need you to, I will need the majority of you to switch on their cameras. So I hope everybody else can. Right. Okay. Yeah, I wonder whether if there's let me just check with our participants. Is there anybody else that doesn't feel like, maybe if you just let me know. Oh, okay, for some people the camera is not working. We might have to really adapt this workshop if that is the case. Anybody else? Feel free to use maybe the text if you function to say if that's an issue. This is just so I can get a sense of the situation, so we can plan the activity accordingly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some slides about the about this workshop first, and then we'll come back to this, and then I'll ask again. Hopefully by then people will have been less shy. And just to also perhaps I just wanted to perhaps reassure everybody that the reason why we asked for the camera on is purely on the basis of being able to draw, because part of the workshop today will include some elements of sketching. And one of the aspects that I'd like for you to do is as a stimulus to sketch what you see on the screen. So the more of us are on the screen, the better. For that, but there is, of course you're not obliged to do that, of course, but it would really help us if the majority of us can do that. So I'll leave you, let me just start the session. Perhaps this can warm us up a little bit, and then we can get to that point. All right. So first of all, my name is Jacek, and like I said, thank you very much, Tim, for the introduction. Lovely to meet you all, and I hope today can be a stimulus for thinking about these ideas in a way that can be creative, that can give you more creative ideas, and just also to reassure everybody that whichever experience you have in your work, whether you are an artist, whether you are complete beginner, whether you've never done any artistic thing at all, that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely all to do with playing with artistic creative ideas together. There is no right or wrong in this workshop, and also once again, the only reason why we'd love for everybody to switch on their cameras if they can is purely on the basis of doing some exercises in which you will be drawing what's on what you can see in the screen. And for no other reason other than that. So let me just share my screen for a second, and I'm going to start with this. You probably should be able to see it soon. And can I just, okay, brilliant, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so we're calling this the Public Art Experiment. And like I said, I'm Jacek Ludwig-Skarso. I'm a reader in art and performance at London Metropolitan University. And by reader, basically my role means that I both teach at the university. I lead particularly the MA Public Art and Performance, but also I'm also a researcher and artist, and I research through my own artistic work and through looking at the artistic work of other people as well. So the Public Art Experiment leads immediately to the first question of what is it that we mean by public art. And I'm, reminded of the amazing examples of public art that I saw in Hong Kong 2 years ago. And suddenly cities like Hong Kong, like London, are often very famous for some of breathtaking works of art, of public art. Public art tends to, is often known as an urban phenomenon that happens in cities, but we shouldn't forget that, of course, public art happens everywhere. And this is a classic example of UK public art. This is in the north of England by Anthony Gormley. Many of you might know this name. Anthony Gormley works on all sorts of different scales, but also very, very famous for the works that he created in the public sphere, in the public realm. And in this particular case, the Angel of the North is a very interesting example of public art, because here you've got this immense statue. And I just wanted to point at this, at the scale of this. So you can see the people here, and you can see the scale of this sculpture. The sculpture is made of there's no coincidence in terms of the choice of, there's no sort of randomness in terms of the choice of materials through which the sculpture was made. The Angel of the North was a sculpture made of industrial material to both kind of celebrate and remind ourselves on the industrial legacy of the north of England, particularly at a time where a lot of the factories in England were closing, with a different sort of economy taking place. So it's a classic example of public art for many reasons, because it happens in a public space, so you don't have to pay for a ticket to go and see it. It's there. It's there for you to enjoy. Also, it creates a space. It's in the middle of the countryside, in a space that's not necessarily recognized for a particular reason, other than a general beautiful countryside. But this clearly created a place out of it, in what we can sort of call often place making, in the sense that we literally kind of mark a space because of it. Most importantly, it talks about the public, the life of the public life in the north of England. And so public art very often takes this form of very large artworks, but it doesn't always have to be large at all. And in fact, it doesn't have to be sculpture. It doesn't have to be permanent. So I'm just going to give you a couple more slides so we can just unpick this idea before we get to some practical tasks. Right, public art can take any form. It can be, as we've just seen, a sculpture, but it can also be graffiti, murals, so things that you might see. Sometimes you see graffitis in a city, and sometimes you see these amazing murals that may cover the whole of a building. Sometimes you might see some much more random graffiti, and you might wonder, is it art or not? Well, that's up to you to decide, up to the artist to decide. But certainly this is a medium through which public art can happen. But public art can also happen in lots of other ways. In digital media, for instance, if you think, well, if we are projecting onto a building, lighting in a particular way, that's not just about the functionality of lighting, maybe through a video as an example, through VR as well, so through virtual reality. Maybe you've got an experience in virtual reality in a public space. And as an example, imagine if you went into a square of London or Hong Kong, and for instance, were able to, for a particular experience, wear goggles, VR goggles, to see the same space, let's say 200 years ago, and actually be able to see it. What makes it public art? Because it's done for the public, because it's accessible to the public, and because it's not based on necessarily simply selling an experience, but it's about it being inclusive to begin with. Public art, therefore, can also happen as a performance, because it's, again, what would make it public is whether it's the accessibility that it has for the audience. And then you could include also participatory activities. So in fact, many of the activities that are in at Spark Festival could be seen as forms of public art, whether or not they're necessarily presented in that way, but they certainly could be understood in that through that perspective. Sound, one of my students recently did a really interesting project where she placed different QR codes around London. And so as you could, with your devices, you could scan a QR code and listen to an excerpt from this audio guide, which was an actual fictional audio guide based on a sort of as a fictional character in like a form of audiobook, allowing you to travel around London. And so that's another way of a very interesting public interaction. Other things that you might be familiar or maybe less familiar with are also this idea of the immersive environment. So for instance, when we might create within an existent environment, something that becomes immersive. Immersive can be, it's often a very trendy word that is used so often nowadays, but essentially to mean that I'm literally transported somewhere else through, whether through a design, whether through technology or some other experience. Most importantly, whatever the form these public art activities take place, the key is not what it looks like to make it public art, but the principle behind it. Is it made for the public, in public, and perhaps by the public, if particularly when we look at a participatory activity? So for instance, what we are doing today, yes, it's led by me, but actually it's made by all of us. And hopefully you'll all gain something from it. Just a couple of principles that I just wanted to show you in terms of just what the recent year or so or more, in fact more than a year now, has generated in this respect. Public and private spaces have blurred significantly since COVID-19. As we meet via our screens, do you ever get curious about what the space behind the people you talk to looks like? What stories do they tell? So it's a very interesting moment really in our time, because suddenly, again, the technology was always there, but we weren't using it so much. And now, for instance, you know, we broadcast ourselves, our own screen becomes broadcast to the public. So to some extent, you could say that this space that I'm in, so right now I'm sitting in my little study in London, and the space, and you probably might see different elements behind me, and those elements become projected to as a public space. So there's a strange kind of combination as we broadcast ourselves. Are our spaces private or do they become public? And you can see where I'm going with this. To some extent, it's a bit of both. So my space right now, of course, is my private space, but within the space of the screen, as you see me, that it becomes public. And as public space, it's open for interpretation. So you can see where I am and interpret a story behind it. Consider this element, because we'll come back to this idea of storytelling in a second. So for the purpose of this workshop, I'd like for you to imagine that if we join our screens, which is why I would absolutely appreciate if later on you can turn on your cameras if you can, we create a public space. Because the more screens there are, the more we'll be aware of the publicness of that. And that publicness is absolutely only for the basis of this workshop. For this workshop, we will explore simple creative tasks via our screens, explore how others, the public, interact with our work, and how you interact as public to the work of others. So it's this, I'm particularly interested in this relationship between our screens. So our interaction, so to say, as myself in the screen, I'm open to the public, as yourselves, the public that's today made of the 10 of us. But equally, that that I myself am the public for the other screens, and therefore I can interpret what I see in front of me with the same under the same relationship. So it's an interactive, it's an equal measure. And I think one of the key principles that you see today is that public art is always about questioning hierarchies, going beyond hierarchies. There is no hierarchy. Yes, of course, for the purpose of this, of course, I'll be facilitating, therefore leading the workshop, but there is no hierarchy in our relationship in the way we can create ideas together. Now, just to say, why is it called public art experiment? Well, first of all, because we're testing an idea and we're not preempting a particular outcome. So it's a creative experiment. There is no preempted outcome, and most importantly, there's no right or wrong. And therefore, just really, really want to reassure you about this. If I'll be asking you to sketch something, to interpret something, but there is absolutely no right or wrong, because it is an experiment, and that's what we are kind of exploring together. Now, are you ready? Okay, so my first task, and I'm going to ask the question again, if people might want to join us, switching on their screens, is I'd like you to sketch a person that you see on the screen without telling them. I'm going to now stop sharing here so we can see each other a little bit better. I should also say that if for anybody, if you can't see for any reason, if you can't see the person on the screen properly, absolutely feel free. For the purpose of this, you can absolutely also use your imagination as well. Oh, thank you, Emily, for switching on your screens. Does anybody else want to join us? No, very good. So thank you for those that are brilliant. Thank you, Natalie. Hi. And anybody else wants to join us? Come on. Let's get it started. It's also, perhaps one thing that I should say, that that for the purpose of this, what also makes it useful is that if we're all visible, then of course it becomes much more equal as an experience. You see, whereas if you are sort of invisible, then of course, what we were mentioning before about the idea of hierarchy, it becomes more difficult to interpret, but obviously it's absolutely up to you. So I'm going to ask, of course, so if you are not visible in the screen, then of course you'll have to draw what you see on the screen. That puts in a position of power, right? Because you're not visible and we are, but there you go. That's part of the experiment. And if that's okay for everybody else, we'll be here. And I hope we can all join in this. So all you need is simply a piece of paper and a pen, or a marker, or a pencil. Absolutely, it doesn't matter what quality it is, and whatever you've got. So perhaps if you want to just take, just in case you were not ready to do this activity, and you just need to grab something, do please feel free to grab it now. And so at the moment, you probably see just 5 of us on screen. Like I said, just to also reassure everybody that if for any reason the visibility of the screen or you can't see the person in the screen clearly, then absolutely this is not about that. It's about being able to also use your imagination as well. But for the purpose of this, I just want you to start from the simple task of drawing. So choose somebody on the screen and simply draw them. and see, and you don't, please you don't have to tell who you're drawing. It's just simply an exercise. Just find that idea of drawing somebody and see what happens. Drawing is an interesting one. So, by the way, as we'll talk, as you do your task, I'll be talking every so often. And but I will always be very clear if I want you to pause. So I will always say, please pause, and so you'll know when to do that. So otherwise I'll just be talking every so often. Normally, when if I were there in Hong Kong and we were all in the same room, what I would normally do is play some music in the background to put some atmosphere on. The only thing is that if I do that now on Zoom, the quality, I'm sure you all know that if we play music through Zoom, the quality is so annoying. It really gets yeah, so it's definitely not a pleasant experience necessarily. It depends really, but more often than not, it isn't. So like I said, you're just drawing the person that you chose on the screen. You're not going to tell them. You're not going to initially show them. Later on, we'll kind of use these different sketches that you're creating. As you sketch the person, you might find that you might want to draw them very small because we're seeing each other small on the screen. But I'm going to encourage you to not necessarily draw small. Go big. Go sort of see what happens. And perhaps another aspect that I want you to be aware of is that this workshop is done on the screen, but we intentionally decided not to make it a technology-based workshop. At some point, so for instance, just to give you, as you draw, just to give you some idea about my work. So I work also in video and performance mainly. So my background is in performance, and then I work in visual art, video, and sometimes I do collaborations with, say, virtual reality or other such technologies. For the purpose of this, however, we're going to absolutely not use anything remotely technological. And that's kind of hopefully a reminder that the legacy of COVID doesn't mean that we necessarily have to all by default simply change everything we do into a technological experience. And yeah, so basically so you continue to draw. And you continue to draw.
Okay.
And Tim, sorry, just so you know that a few people are not muted at the moment, so we can hear a bit of background noise. If that's all right, maybe just for now. And yes, so basically, yes, as you draw, you just simply sort of explore these ideas. And yes, with going sort of really emphasizing this point that what we're doing today is we're using our screens, but we're not being technological. Drawing is an interesting activity, isn't it? Because in some cases, it almost reminds us of childhood. Some people have fantastic sort of memories of drawing. Some people are very confident in drawing. I'm not, by the way. I'm not particularly, I sketch a lot because of work, but it's not my big thing, but that's absolutely not important here. And even if you find that your first sketches are not, that you might think, oh, maybe this doesn't look right, remember, there is no right and no wrong. So I'm going to give you 2 more minutes to just keep going. And what I want you to do now is, as you continue to draw, I'd like for you to not just think of what's on the page, but think of the actual action of drawing. So that your drawing, the fact that you are drawing, is just as important as what comes out of the drawing onto the page. Some of you might be...
Jacek?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly check because I see that little star is here.
Oh, yes.
喂，小星。喂，小星，聽唔聽到？So he's one of the visually impaired artists
Oh,
that
okay.
we know. So I just checking if this is working for him, or what you know, what aspect that he might be picking up from this.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much, Yindun. That's really good for me to know, and I just wanted to remind everybody for exactly on this point that for the purpose of this, by the way, it's absolutely fine to. I might refer, by the way, during the workshop about the idea of drawing each other from a screen, what you see on the screen. Having said that, it's absolutely fine, and in fact, you will see that more and more in this workshop we'll be using our imagination is really the key of this workshop. So it's also completely fine to simply draw what you either through imagination or through whichever other forms, you know, however you want to respond to this task. And again, there's absolutely no right or wrong. And I'm very, very happy when people use other forms, you know, of expression. And particularly that you see in a second that the more you go on, the more you see that I'll be talking less and less about the idea of the image being important here. So 2 minutes have passed, and I'm now going to ask you to stop the drawing for a second and change and start another one. And in the other one, again, whether through your, so I'm going to give a task of selecting another person from the screen. Again, you're not going to tell them what it is, who they are. You're simply going to draw another person. And once again, you can absolutely work from not necessarily by looking at the screen, but you can also use your imagination. And in this case, what I want you to do is you're going to do the same thing, but you're never going to lift the pen or the pencil off the page. So you're going to do the same thing, but you're never going to lift the pen and pencil or pencil off the page. And so it has to be one continuous line. One continuous line. And although we can't necessarily see each other, do please don't cheat. the thing with this type of work, because you know it's often, and I say don't cheat not because I don't trust anybody, but because I'm the first one that often wants to cheat in this case. And you often want to say, okay, yes, I'm not lifting my pen, but just for a second, but try really to resist that temptation and see what happens. And of course, as you can imagine, of course there'll be sections of your drawing in which you have to kind of continue a line even when you think maybe it's not there. So you're going to keep drawing, change the subject, but now never lift the pen off the paper, the pencil pen off the paper. So it's one continuous line. And what I'd like for you to think as you're doing this, again, I'm going to give you another 5 minutes. What I'd like for you to consider when you do this is, again, more and more the action, the process of sketching, of drawing. And I'm going to ask you one thing, to start to really focus on the idea that you draw what you see, not what you know. You draw what you see, not what you know. And for me, that's a really important point. This is, by the way, a task that's often used in art schools, and I'm using it simply as a little warm-up for us. But that principle that you draw what you see, not what you know, because think of it in this way, very often as we draw, we think, okay, so, well, obviously I might start from, I don't know, the eyes, or maybe the shape of the face. And then from there, I need to find certain proportions, and maybe the eyes normally are this point in the face, and yeah, and maybe I want to make this drawing look like this because that looks like a better drawing, etc. You see what I'm doing there? I'm slightly overthinking the process. And that's why it's kind of try to be much more spontaneous there. And so you draw what you see, not what you know. Not what you know means, again, in this context, not what you think the drawing should look like, because you've been perhaps trained in a particular way, or because you've always done it in a particular way. That's drawing from what you know, not from what you see in this particular moment. And so the emphasis is about now. In this particular moment, just draw what you see. Don't judge it. Draw what you see, not what you know. 2 more minutes. One continuous line. And careful not to cheat. And once again, because I'm the first one cheating at these exercises, because it's difficult. Sometimes, again, you just want to, you just lift the pen. Have you ever seen, so you keep drawing, but have you ever seen the work, for instance, the very famous films of Jackson Pollock, as he throws colors, drips colors, as he dripped colors on the paint, on the canvas, on big canvases. And that was an interesting sort of moment in art, because really that really was when it started to really highlight the fact that actually the process of making art was often just as interesting and just as important as the work itself in the end. That's the principle that we use a lot in public artwork, where that process of making, often because we involve many people, is just as important as the thing that stays at the end. Because that thing that may stay at the end might stay there, just, it might not be permanent. All right, now I'm going to make this task even more difficult, because I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, but you're going to change the subject again, change the screen that you're looking at, or the image that you're drawing. And I'd like for you to draw it without ever looking down at the paper. And in this case, I will be seeing if you will do it right. So you're going to look, simply look at the screen and draw without looking at what you're drawing. Of course, what will happen, and I'm sure you're guessing already what's going to happen, is that these drawings will become more and more abstract. The need for the drawing to be an accurate depiction of what you see on the screen, becomes less relevant. So once again, you're never going to, I just want to add to the previous task. So therefore, you're still not going to lift the pen from the paper, but also you're not going to look down at the paper. And hopefully you'll feel where, so that you, in order to make sure that you're not drawing onto your desk. And sometimes it happens, and it's all right. But otherwise, just simply, don't look down. Don't look down. One continuous line, never lifting the pen, and never looking down, so that you're just trusting that instinct. And it's just a lovely exercise for me, because it really reminds me about this idea of being in the moment without judging what comes out, because it can never, in a sense, you're releasing any expectation, because it's going to be quite scribbly. It's going to be quite abstract, and that's fine. And as you can imagine, more often than not, what I find is that these drawings are often the best ones, because they are a reflection of the moment. And I may not recognize who you're drawing. Perhaps what was very likely is that the first drawings that you've done are probably where you could recognize the person, perhaps very well. Perhaps we might say, wow, a fantastic craft in drawing this. But actually these later ones are where you start to see the character, the moment, most importantly, the moment when you were drawing becomes immortalized. 3 more minutes. And if you feel that you finished that particular one, try another one. Again, there is no right, no wrong. And we're doing this kind of like a warm-up to really get the gist of this idea of creating on the spot without overthinking, without judging, and also enjoying the process of creating together, because that's also very important. Of course, and just an important point perhaps to say, during COVID, how many webinars have been produced during COVID? Thousands, well, millions. And in a sense, and how great, to some extent, great, we've got a fantastic resource of lots of different things to take from individually at our own leisure, at our own pace, time, and that's great in itself. But there's something about doing something together that's also really, really important. And again, particularly in this little introduction also to public art strategies, that togetherness is so, so important here. All right. Okay, pause there 1 second. I'm going to share again my screen and move to the next slide. By the way, I'm always going to read the slide exactly as it is on the page. So if you can't see the text, absolutely fine. I will always read it aloud. So what I want you to do now is the next step, which is to concentrate on the space behind. So what's on my screen now, it says, now sketch the space behind the person you're drawing and use your imagination to complete the picture. So I'm stopping sharing. So, and what I mean by that is that obviously only some of us are visible right now on the screen, but I'd like for you to focus now not on the person, but on the space, because again, one of the themes of this workshop is to think of the public space. And in a sense, out of the 5 people that we can see on the screen right now, those spaces behind us become part of this sort of collective public space, only to the extent that they're included here. You might realize, for instance, that I've got, let me just show you, I've got a door here, and and let me just show you this. Oh, 1 second. And I also have a cat here with me. This is my cat, by the way, who doesn't necessarily often enjoy being included in this. He wants to lie down. But so there's a lot outside of what you can see. There you go, it's gone. There's a lot outside of the screen that you see that you don't know. And in the same way that whoever, anybody that we can see now has a lot that is unknown to the viewer. So I'd like to think of this really as an exercise for interpretation now. In fact, I'm going to even suggest that think of the space behind the person purely as a starting point. I'm actually interested in you creating something here. So on the same basis, not necessarily without having to look down at all, you can look down at this point, but I just want you to be in that moment spontaneously and simply draw a space that could be perhaps inspired by one of the spaces that you're seeing on the screen, or it could happen to be completely different, and that's completely fine as well. And you can absolutely use imagination. In any case, you'd have to use your imagination because, for instance, if you happen to draw me right now, you got, again, the space behind me, but I'm covering it. So you have to kind of make the, create the some of the picture inevitably out of your imagination. But I suppose at this point, let that imagination go further, really create something. Let's see what happens there. So once again, we're now focusing on a space, taking as inspiration the space that you might see behind one of us in the screen. And then I want you to use your imagination. I'm going to preempt something that that I'm going to show you in a second back on my slide, but for now, just keep drawing because I don't want to disrupt the flow. But I want you to start to think whether you're using your imagination or whether you are actually looking at the screen and using some imagination. So to whichever degree that imagination plays a part, I'd like for you to think of not just the visual now, but the other senses. And again, to use your imagination to do so. So for instance, we don't know right now what each other's spaces sound like. We don't know what each other's spaces might smell like, might feel like. Maybe some of us might be on a very soft chair and a very kind of, I don't know, smooth, at a very smooth desk. Some of us might be on a much more solid chair, maybe in a space that might be cold. It might be warm, might be humid. Before, as you might have heard, I was chatting with Tim about the levels of humidity between Hong Kong and London. So what I'm feeling right now, it will be different to what you're feeling. Now, of course, being inside makes another big difference because, of course, regardless of what the temperatures outside, maybe inside it feels completely different. But that's what I want you to start to focus on, not just the visual, but all the senses. And what I'd like for you to do now is, as you keep sketching, and feel free again to, when I say keep sketching, I also mean that you might decide, okay, enough for this sketch, let me start another one. That's completely fine, completely up to you. I'd like for you to start to include other elements. Maybe you might want to use words, so that in these sketches, they start to become more and more abstract, perhaps. And you might include words that describe the feeling of the space you're drawing. How that space feels, what it feels like. And of course, you're working completely from interpretation. It's your interpretation. There absolutely cannot be right or wrong here because it's absolutely from your interpretation. You're creating this, this environment that you're creating is inspired by what you might be seeing on the screen, but ultimately it's your creation. So you're drawing elements, but I'd like for you to think beyond drawing in a literal sense. You might want to include words. What words could you include? Well, anything to do with the feel of something, how a space, what a space feels like. And feels like, once again, I'm thinking of all my senses, sound, a smell, tactile senses, or when we say, oh yeah, well, we're not really tasting the space, but we might taste the air, you know, and just basically think of words that perhaps are conjured up. And those words don't necessarily have to be necessarily a particular, you know, a particular, they don't necessarily have to have a logic to them. Because of course, words are ultimately simply associations. As an example, let me take, if that's right, I'm going to take Tim's example. And of course, Tim is using the Spark background. And so the Spark background has this lovely, I love this design, by the way, and it's got, and it reminds me of paint, this idea, this colorful paint. But then when I look at it more and more, it reminds me of silk. Silk, that reminds me of the colors are fresh and quite cool. So the word cool, silk, and paint, and the idea of one kind of a continuous flow. So you see, already I've got 4 or 5 words there: flow, silk, cool, paint. You see what I'm doing there? Are they literal descriptions of what I'm seeing? Well, they're inspired by what I'm seeing, but it's also very much my interpretation there. Again, a couple more minutes. By the way, at some point, we'll have a tiny little break, like a 5-minute comfort break, purely for just to be able to be also off screen, as well as I'm, you know, I think we've all experienced that, isn't it? That they don't we? That there's a point where it's quite useful to have just a moment. I'll be off screen, then back on screen. I'm just sort of refreshed again. Even though it's a short workshop, I think it's quite nice to have that just a few minutes break. But before we do that, so let me just remind you what we've done so far. We started by simply sketching what you see. And I made that point: sketch what you see, not what you know. Draw what you see, not what you know. And then we started to add more devices, such as never lifting the pen, never looking down. And those devices are all based on this idea of being in that moment of creation without overthinking it. And now we're thinking, because we're using this idea of public space, private space, public space, now we're extending this idea no longer on the people that we're drawing, but on the spaces that we imagine. And the more we go on, the more this imagination aspect becomes important. Okay, now I'm going to, so keep all this, so you got drawings, hopefully you all have a few bits of pieces of paper and drawings in front of you. Some of you might be very well organized and you put one on top of the other. Some of you might be very more like me, perhaps more messy, and you got stuff that you need to come back to. I want you to put it aside for a second and do this exercise. Let me just go back to the screen 1 second. So just so you know that I'm following this. And okay, so we are here. So sketch the, we've just done this, which is the space, sketching the space behind and using our imagination. And now, oops, sorry, let me just go back to that. Yes, so let me just read this slide, which is what I meant before. So keep using your imagination and remember to ask ourselves, what does that space feel like? And in particular, think of, or to think of all the senses, not just our visual experience. Therefore, imagining sound, temperature, yes, colors, which obviously are visual, but also textures, scent, the atmosphere of a space. Often it's impossible to completely, literally describe an atmosphere. What do we mean by atmosphere? A mood, what is it? A feeling? And again, that's where words often fail us, but the combination of words, images, and whatever else you're using can often be very interesting there. Now, oops, and sorry. And again, the other slide that I simply mentioned as you were drawing is what words come to mind, write them down. Are there other ways in which you can express these? Now, a quick little exercise before we go on a tiny little break. And it's taken from the classic game that you find in, and you might call it in lots of different ways. Here we may call it peekaboo, which is so putting your ideas on to one side for now, as in your drawings, keep them at the back of your mind. And what I'm going to ask you to do this for the people that are visible now on the screen, to please join me in this, to place one hand in front of the screen and slowly uncover the camera to reveal different parts of your screen. And you could also do this with an object, by the way, including a piece of paper that you've been using so far. So let me just stop sharing for a second. I'm just going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And you'll see that in a second, that will all make sense, because what we'll do is combine all these different ideas into one happening. I'll call it a happening and explain it after. So very, very simply, I'm going to do this. I'm going to place my hand in front of the screen. And very simply, so you can, and of course, the closer it goes to the screen, the more you can see which bit of my hand it is. And now I'm going to reveal slowly, different elements of the screen or the space behind me. So in that process of the classic, peekaboo type of logic that we often do with children, with babies, it's the same idea. I want you to simply just use your hands just to reveal the screen and see the story that happens. Yes, you're doing this now, and there's a sort of a strange kind of storytelling happening. So if we can all do that for a second. And for the people that are watching this from your screen, so have a think as to, particularly when you start to play with this. It's such a simple device, isn't it? But it's surprisingly effective, because it starts to reveal some sort of way of looking at that space. And as we appear and disappear from the space, there's an element of storytelling that's happening. And I tend to find that often when you do it really, really slowly, and really detailed in the way that you uncover different parts of the screen, we start to read more in that action. So pause there for a second and try that for a second in using the bits of paper that you've been using so far. So if you take any piece of paper, any drawing that you've done so far, can you do the same using that drawing? So you're going to place the drawing in front of the camera and slowly change the position and see what happens. And you might, that's the one, exactly. So maybe if you, there you go, exactly, that's a really good example there. So try that. And if you do it really, really slowly, so that what will happen is that we don't understand exactly what's happening in that space. Yes, good, Emily. Thank you, Natalie. And if you start to see very, very slowly, if you move the camera, if you move the drawing really slowly, we start to read this more and more like an animation. It's interesting, Tim, because because you've got the virtual screen, that's also interesting. It's an interesting way of, but it's actually quite interesting also to see it with the virtual screen, even though it often tends to kind of confuse us, you know. Brilliant. Great. Pause there. We'll come back to this idea after this little break. But before we go on a break, definitely. Great. Good, good, good. So pause there for a second. I'm just going to show you this slide. And what we're going to do, by the way, so I should say, maybe also for Tim to know that normally what we do in this workshop is that we split the group into two halves so that each can watch each other. But it's absolutely, what we can absolutely do instead in this case is maybe I might, the only thing is that I'd love for perhaps to still kind of split ourselves into 2 and 2, if that's all right, purely because then for the people that are doing it, they can also appreciate what it looks like. Otherwise, of course, as you do it, you can't see exactly what's happening. So we're going to do that later on. Of course, again, if other people want to join us after by switching on the camera, that's all we're going to do, by the way. So you know that there's absolutely nothing scary about this. But equally, I'm completely fine if you want to keep your cameras off. And I know, of course, that in some cases you might your camera might not be working or something like that. So that's completely fine. Just before we go on this tiny little break, just one point about this, so you can think about it during the break, which is this. Sorry, let me just get to my PowerPoint. 1 second. I'd like for you. Oops. Just okay. There you go. Right. I'd like for you to think of the power of storytelling, so storytelling through your screen. Of course, we know from cinema, from Netflix, you know, of course, the screen is powerful. Of course, it tells incredible stories. And often we might, you know, because of Netflix and you know, and whatever, and big blockbusters, we might think, you know, okay, well, you need a massive budget to create a story through a screen. But actually, you don't. If you can create stories in lots of different, very simple ways. And of course, the beauty of performance, which is you know, at the core of what we mean by public interactions through art, is that, you know, performance was born in often, you know, in front of a fire, creating shadows perhaps on a wall, you know, and there's something very beautiful about recapturing that simplicity. So what do we mean by story? So I might say create a story. What do you mean by a story? What do you mean? Does it need to have a beginning and an end and a character? So a story may simply communicate. So by story in this context right now, it may simply mean the idea of communicating a mood, an atmosphere, a state of mind. Stories for this workshop do not need to make sense or have a clear beginning and end, and it doesn't have to have a clear character or a plot. So however you think about this, that's whatever you're doing, even just the action of placing your hand in front of the screen and slowly showing parts of the screen, that in itself was telling us a story. And we may not know what the story is, but I'm following it. There's a journey there. Do you see what I mean? So I'm going to stop sharing now. We're going to have a tiny little break of something like, let's say 5 minutes. Right now for me it's 12:36. So for you it should be, what is it, 7:36? Am I right, Tim? Brilliant. I'm getting good at this. So 5 minutes, just literal comfort break. And it's really for us to switch off the cameras for a second and come back to the camera. Please, the people that have the camera on, please come back to that because I need you. And otherwise we come back in 5 minutes and let's have a comfort break. All right, bye-bye. See you in a second. Probably they just wait for you, maybe. Perfect. Okay, we're getting to the last bit of our workshop. So this last bit is just literally a few more minutes. And I just wanted to give you just a little time to breathe for a second before we do this. And it's very, very simple. In fact, you've already done it. You've done it before, already sharing your drawing and using again the way of uncovering that through the screen. I wanted to just remind you, however, that when you're showing this, what tends to work really well is that you slowly reveal parts of your drawing. And again, for the purpose of this, you can use any of the sketches you've done now, by the way, not just the very last one, but also the ones that you did before, and just very, very slowly reveal parts, details of the drawing, so we don't immediately figure out the whole thing. And because that's kind of, it's a bit like, what is, if when you think about it, the art of telling a story is to allow that that process of suspense, of building the narrative. And so if I immediately reveal everything, then obviously it becomes an anticlimax, right? So before we do this, let me just call it, I'm going to give it a particular name. I'm going to call it a happening, what we do here. And let me just show you what that means. Actually, it's here. Okay, and so I'm back on the screen. And in particular, yes, we just had the break. And yes, when we now we're coming back, and we're going to do a 10-20 second kind of action using everything that you've got so far. But most importantly, I'm going to call this a public art happening. A happening, and I'm just reading from the screen now, the term happening was coined in the 1960s, actually, so plenty of time ago, actually. And it consists of typically multiple actions taking place at the same time with no set logic or order. And so let's make a happening via our screens using all the materials that we've played with so far. And that will, in a second, simply conclude our experience today by simply playing with that. So I'm going to ask, and thank you so much for again sharing your screen, Tim, Emily, Natalie, and Yinlun. And can I perhaps ask you, if that's all right, if we can start again? Bear in mind, there's no right or wrong, and perhaps Tim and Emily, are you happy to start from this? So what I'm simply going to ask you now is to do exactly what you did before, revealing very slowly the image that you've drawn, and what we're going to, the rest of us are going to do, we're going to switch off our cameras so that we give you the full stage right now. And then after, that's all right, Yinlun and Natalie, if we can do the same. And of course, if anybody else, by the way, wants to join us at this point, switching on your screen, please do that as well. Or otherwise, it's absolutely fine to simply be spectators for this and be the public. All right, so each time I'm just going to tell you when to start, and at some point to say, okay, and let's stop there. And you simply, so roughly I'm talking maybe 30 seconds, something like that. So very, very short idea. Are we ready? So we're going to start with Tim and Emily. And so Natalie, Yinlun, and myself are going to switch off our cameras right now. So I'm going to switch off my camera. So at the moment, we just see Tim and Emily. Oh, Emily, I think you've disappeared for a second. Let's see. Yeah, oh, there you are. Perfect. You're back. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to start. And can I just ask you to start by covering completely the screen with your paper, with your hands, whatever it is? Okay, brilliant. And when you're ready, let's start. Go. And bring it to an end. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very interesting, isn't it? And I think now if also Natalie and Yinlun, if you switch on your cameras for a second, and I'll do the same. Did you notice that? It's very, very interesting that how we start to see these, so obviously nothing is planned between Emily and Tim, but we start to see things. And it starts to become like a story. You can imagine if we had lots of different screens, we'd read even more complex stories there. And at some point, at least on my screen, Emily's image slightly stopped, as often happens on Zoom, and then it come back again. But actually, even though that wasn't premeditated, it became a really interesting tool because suddenly the image froze and then it became something else. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. It was brilliant. Right, Natalie and Ian, if we can do exactly the same. So we'll start simply playing, and I'm going to ask you to start with already covering the whole screen so that you slowly reveal. And in that process of revealing, we then create an act of storytelling. Okay, I'm going to switch off my camera. Same thing. When you're ready. And then move really slowly. There you go. And pause there. Thank you very much. Again, really interesting. And what we saw there, and let's all switch on the cameras again so we can all be visible, if that's all right. But what was interesting there, very well done, and it's again a really interesting things started to happen. At some point, Yin, your image was very, because it was so close, of course, on the camera, it appeared out of focus. And then suddenly, as you brought the image back, then suddenly we saw it in focus. And that combined with Natalie's drawing of the different segments of that. So we started to read the whole together. And again, what stories did it tell? It's not so much a case of course, we're not necessarily, we could read, we could imagine characters, of course, and everything. But most importantly, we got a sense of a journey happening there. And the journey was created through the combination of different participatory activities. We all participated in this and we all shared something. And once again, that's a form for the public art interaction. So thank you. First of all, I'm going to a round of applause for the performers today. And what I'm going to do now is just finish off with a couple of slides, just to say how do we, what can we take from this workshop? What I hope you can take from this workshop for the future. So I'm going to go just a second. Oops, I'm back on here, and yeah, let me find it again. There we go. Okay, so first of all, oops, there you go. So well done. Indeed, and I really, really appreciate it, because I really appreciate the fact that of sharing the work. Sharing is just as important as doing this. So things that I'd like for you to take, I hope you can take from this workshop today. I'm very much aware that many of us, we all work in different ways, different fields, and that's absolutely fine. But whatever you bring to those workshops, what I hope that you can take from the workshop is this. Well, first of all, the idea that all creative practice can be considered. So right now I'm reading from the screen again. So all creative practice can be considered public art simply if it creates a connection with others, if it invites the public into an exchange. So even though at the beginning of this workshop, I showed you the massive Angel of the North by Antony Gormley, actually public art can look like that, of course, but it doesn't have to look like that. It can also be a creative experience that you simply consciously exchange with others. And that's what makes it public, because I'm inviting people in and I'm not asking them to buy something and in order to experience it. I'm just simply saying, let's make something. Next time you are in a public space, consider how that public space interacts with the public that's there. Are there any creative opportunities that could be explored in that space? So ask yourself, and sometimes I love this exercise. Sometimes I walk around London and I see, of course, there's plenty of like, just like in Hong Kong, of course, there's plenty of artistic statements here and there. But sometimes I see a space that perhaps, doesn't have much. And I think, oh, this could be an interesting space to do something creative. And I often say to my students, when you see something missing, when you see a space, ask yourself, what's missing from that space that could help people connect even better? And finally, my last point that I'd like for you to take with you is, as we increasingly communicate via our screens, feel free to explore new ways in which we can do so creatively, making a screen into a public art platform. And I really wanted to stress this point, and I hope you all you've all seen this in the lovely sharings that we did just now. That actually you don't have to be a tech expert to work to use the screen creatively. Sometimes that simple peekaboo experience, that simple drawing and showing and revealing a drawing can be just as powerful, and sometimes I would argue even more powerful than a very tech-heavy experience. And finally, thank you very much for having me today. And also to say, if you want to find out more about public art in all its other forms, including the big installations and big spaces, do please check out the MA that I have the pleasure of leading, which is our MA in Public Art and Performance at London Metropolitan University. But also, together with that, I also co-direct a research center called Creature. Creature stands for Creative Arts, Cultures and Engagement. And with Creature, we do lots of different events, publications, exhibitions, performances. And in fact, in December, we'll do a really interesting event related to this, because I'm going to invite two artists who will be sharing their work. And this will be an online event, so you can watch it from Hong Kong as well. And you can, and two artists that work specifically through performance and drawing. If you want to find out more, by the way, there should be links on the Spark website. Otherwise, simply Google Public Art and Performance London Met, or simply Google Creature London Met. And otherwise, this is my email if we want to ask questions or if you want to connect. And I'm going to now stop sharing and just thank Tim, first of all, for and the Spark team for inviting me to do this. And I'm always, it's such a pleasure. And I'm just really, really hoping that in 2 years' time, whenever Spark happens again, that it'll be in Hong Kong. So because I can't wait to come back again. And obviously, before we leave, I just wanted to check, does anybody have any question that you wanted to ask, by the way? All right, so if there's no question, we can finish here. But most importantly, I hope that you've all enjoyed and taken something from it, even if it's just a sense of, oh, that's another way of, I never thought of playing with my screen in this way. That's good enough as well. And I hope otherwise that you can really take lots of inspiration from this. And like I said, do look around you. And again, how wonderful that we live in cities like London or Hong Kong, where public art is something that's very, very readily available, and where where we can feel inspired, and that's always a good thing. Thank you very much. All right.
All right,
Tim,
thank
shall
you.
we'll bring it to an end now?
Yes,
And
thank you.
brilliant.
Yes,
Excellent. So thank you so much. Oh, brilliant. Oh, lovely. Thank you, Connie, for this. Brilliant. And enjoy. Have a lovely weekend. And enjoy the rest of Spark, by the way. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.